Right now, Europe is acting as if it's preparing for a war with Russia, and now there are even talks about nuclear armament. Today, let's take a proper look at this topic. Before that, I provide the latest current affairs news every day, so if you want to get information quickly, please hit the subscribe button. First, I think we need to take a look at the current situation. On February 16th, President Nawrocki of Poland said that, while respecting international regulations, Poland should pursue nuclear capabilities. President Nawrocki of Poland argued that because Poland borders conflict zones like Russia and Ukraine, it must enhance national security with a nuclear weapons program. He avoided mentioning when the nuclear weapons development program could begin, but Poland continues to emphasize the need to develop nuclear weapons. Former President Andrzej Duda said Poland was ready to host American nuclear weapons under NATO's sharing system, and this goes even further. Also, Sweden has discussed the need for nuclear weapons. On January 27, Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said they are consulting with the United Kingdom and France on nuclear power. He said that if dangerous countries have nuclear weapons, healthy democracies should be allowed to have them too. Currently, some in Sweden say they should consider nuclear deterrence options besides relying on the United States. Sweden also previously developed nuclear weapons. What's interesting is that it's not just a specific party calling for nuclear development. Almost all parties are constantly bringing up the discussion of nuclear development. Of course, there are differences in their approaches. Now that even Sweden has started bringing up the idea of nuclear armament, the whole of Europe seems to be greatly shaken. Why are so many European countries continuously discussing their own nuclear armament these days? Is it because the follow-up agreement to the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which limited nuclear forces between Russia and the United States, ended without any replacement? The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty lasted over 50 years after the Cold War, but now that it's ended, countries worldwide are entering a nuclear arms race. Right now, within Europe, there is a growing sentiment that President Trump cannot be trusted, and discussions about independent nuclear armament are continuing. Poland and Sweden are the most representative countries. With rising concerns that the United States may stop protecting Europe with its nuclear umbrella, talks about developing nuclear weapons continue. Germany and the United Kingdom are now openly preparing for war with Russia and taking action. Recently, there was the Munich Security Conference. German Army Chief of Staff Carsten Breuer and British Chief of the General Staff Richard Ritten issued an open letter stating military buildup can't be delayed, the risk of war between Russia and NATO is rising, and publicly announced this. Let me read you part of the joint letter from Chief of Staff Carsten Breuer and Chief of the General Staff Richard Ritten. History teaches us that deterrence fails when the enemy senses division and weakness. If Russia perceives Europe as a divided region, it could act as a military provocation that expands aggression beyond Ukraine, as stated in the letter. They also emphasize that rearmament is not about wanting war, but rather a responsible action by the state to protect its people and maintain peace. They wrote in the letter that strong power is what deters aggression, and if military strength weakens, aggression becomes inevitable. They stressed that all of Europe, not just Germany and the United Kingdom, must quickly strengthen their military power. NATO countries have already pledged to spend 5% of their gross domestic product on defense and security by 2035. However, it is expected that this pace will accelerate even further. Germany and the United Kingdom are also preparing for war. Germany has chosen to permanently deploy a combat brigade of 4,000 to 5,000 troops on NATO's eastern front. They amended their constitution to permit virtually unlimited defense spending, and factories that once made car parts are now making ammunition. The United Kingdom is also currently building at least 6 ammunition and shell factories to ensure a smooth supply of ammunition and shells. The United Kingdom is urgently sending its largest warship, the aircraft carrier Prince of Wales, to the North Atlantic and Arctic. This aims to boost deterrence against the Russian naval threat, which has risen 30% in 2 years. Norway has doubled the number of British troops there and plans to raise its defense budget to 2.6% of gross domestic product in 2027. The United Kingdom Ministry of Defense called this the largest sustained defense spending increase since the Cold War ended. But even so, there is still tremendous opposition from the public. According to a survey conducted by the polling agency YouGov in January, only about 25% of Britons supported raising taxes or cutting public service budgets to increase defense spending and invest more in weapons development. According to a political poll, only 24% of Germans support increasing defense spending, especially in Germany, where a de facto conscription system is in place. The situation has become even more chaotic. The younger generation in Germany, who are most directly affected by this move, are now completely outraged. In fact, this reaction is only natural. Since 2011, Germany has suspended conscription and has been operating with a de facto volunteer military, but now the government has suddenly started signaling that people may have to go to the military again. For teens and people in their 20s, this issue inevitably disrupts their lives. That's why there's a strong strong backlash among the youth in Germany right now. In particular, German students and the younger generation have started to organize school strike alliances and are systematically opposing the very idea of mandatory military service. They say they don't want to spend 6 months in barracks learning discipline, obedience, and killing, and have started a nationwide anti-conscription movement. This group also formed strike committees in around 90 regions, not just big cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich, but also smaller cities, and held street protests. The education office tried to pressure them by warning that their absences would be treated as unexcused, but the students didn't back down and continued their protests. Public opinion in the political sphere is also becoming increasingly serious. Up to 80% of Die Linke supporters, a major German left-wing party, say they oppose mandatory certification. As shown in the actual street protests, most young people acknowledge that national defense is important, but they strongly express that they don't want to be dragged into war themselves. In other words, the logic that you should defend your country if needed is clashing head-on with the reality that they don't want to risk their own lives in war. What's even more interesting here is that the number of conscientious objector applications in Germany has reached its highest level since 2011. The German basic law requires men over 18 to serve in the military, but also grants the right to refuse service for personal beliefs or conscience. However, by October 2025, the number of conscientious objection applications received nationwide reached 3,034. Back in 2021, there were only 201 applications, but in just 4 years, the number has surged to 3,043. In 2022, there were 951 cases, in 2023, there were 1,079 cases, and in 2024, the number nearly doubled from the previous year to 2,249 cases. With Germany considering reinstating conscription, the number of people refusing military service is quickly rising across society. Is the reason Europe is ramping up its military power right now just because of the war in Ukraine? What Europe is truly afraid of is not that everything will end if Ukraine falls, but the possibility that Russia might not stop there. European leaders currently envision a very simple worst-case scenario. At some point, the front lines in Ukraine enter a lull, and Russia, whether through a ceasefire or negotiations, takes a breather. During that time, they reorganize their troops, run their military factories at full capacity, and restore their military strength. The most dangerous moment in a war isn't when the gunfire stops, but rather when there's time to prepare for war. And then, where could Russia target next? The region that Europe is most sensitive about is the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania. These countries are small in size and don't have large populations, but geopolitically, they are the gateway to the heart of NATO. For Russia, even a small conflict here could shake all of Europe. In fact, Russia has often used the pretext of protecting ethnic Russians in the past. There are Russian minorities in the Baltic states as well, and seeds of conflict always remain in the border areas. Russia doesn't seek a large invasion, but rather gray zone provocations that NATO would struggle to address. Mysterious armed groups appear at the border. Russia officially denies any involvement, and pro-Russian protests break out locally. Meanwhile, major infrastructure is paralyzed and chaos ensues. NATO has a collective defense agreement, the principle that if one country is attacked, everyone fights together. Provocations in the Baltic states may cleverly blur the line. Is this a true invasion or just a local skirmish? As soon as this debate starts, NATO will become divided. Some countries will push for immediate troop deployment, while others will hesitate, saying escalation should be avoided. Europe's greatest fear is the moment the world sees NATO unable to act as one. That's when Russia will be convinced NATO is only an organization of words. If this happens, it means Russia will act even more boldly, and the consequences will fall directly on Europe. What Europe fears is not the Russian military. What Europe truly fears is the moment when Europe cannot unite as one. When that moment arrives, war won't be a choice. It will begin automatically. Europe knows this fear and is preparing for war to prevent it.